Today's topic is ethics and Vedanta. Now, ethics is an important component of all systems of philosophy, and also it plays a very important role in theology, in religion, practically in all aspects of life. It has got different connotations, different implications, in different branches of learning, and also in our day-to-day life. Vedanta is not just a metaphysical system. Of course, it is an important branch of world thought, but then it is not just a metaphysical system alone. More than a metaphysical system, it is a way of life, an attitude, an approach towards our day-to-day life and its problems. Those of you who have studied Vedanta philosophy must be familiar with some of its fundamental tenets and principles. In fact, the definition of Vedanta itself is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. In English, it could be said, Vedanta says there is only one absolute reality, one eternal reality. The reality which remains eternal, everlasting, unchangeable, which is the immanent principle in all living beings, and also the omnipresent, all-pervading reality, the transcendental reality. This Brahman or Atman or consciousness as a living spiritual consciousness within us, we call it Atman, as the all-pervading reality, with the source of whole creation, we call it Brahman, the same. Now, what has it to do with ethics? The other part of the Sanskrit verse that I quoted just now is, the word used is mithya, which is sometimes very erroneously translated as illusion. Mithya doesn't mean illusion, because if the word were mithya or illusion, as we understand it, as we wrongly interpret it, then ethics has no place in Vedanta. If the world is just a dream, just an illusion, without any substratum, without any reality, then ethics and morality have no place in Vedanta. But Vedanta doesn't mean by the word mithya what we normally understand by the English word illusion. We call it optical illusion. There may be auditory illusions, different kinds of illusions, sometimes even as hallucinations are mentioned in books on psychology and psychiatry. So sometimes people very unfortunately interpret mithya as illusion, which is a very, very serious error, and more than that, it's a terrible injustice to the very fundamental teachings of Vedanta. Vedanta only says the world in which we are living, all the material pleasures that we are enjoying, that we are aspiring for, do not last for long, do not live for long. They are not eternal. And that anybody can understand. A chocolate, if you eat, it's gone. The world is like that. Swami Vivekananda, in one of his talks, which he delivered in Kumbhakonam, after his return from the West, he said, the uniqueness of Vedanta is that it tells us that this world of material pleasures is a matter of a day or two and do not last eternally. That's the real implication of Vedanta. So first, as an introduction, before dealing with the subject of ethics in Vedanta, I must point out again and again that Vedanta does not teach us that the world is non-existent or the world is illusion. The word mithya was wrongly interpreted and translated into the English word illusion for a very long time. And historically speaking, it was Swami Vivekananda who first pointed out this very serious error. The first translation of Gita took place in 1784 by a great Indologist and student of Sanskrit. His name was Charles Wilkins. He was a clerk working for English East India Company. It was a trading organization which was founded during the last years of Queen Elizabeth. It's a trading organization. And Charles Wilkins was a very loyal, a very devoted servant of East India Company. He had studied some Sanskrit and he was encouraged by Lord Vaughan Hastings, who was the first Governor General of Bengal after Bengal was conquered by the British. So Vaughan Hastings persuaded this young man to translate Gita into English. And it is said that the first edition of his work translated words like mithya and maya into the English equivalent illusion. And later, when Shankaracharya's celebrated commentaries were translated into English, they often translated the word mithya and maya into the English equivalent illusion, which was a historical error, not deliberate, but it just so happened. Now, one of Swami Vivekananda's greatest contribution from epistemological point of view is that he pointed out the serious error of translating the word mithya into illusion. So mithya means that which doesn't exist eternally. That which doesn't exist for all times. Look at the earth. Even San Francisco was different before the earthquake. It has changed its shape perhaps. And very often, earthquakes and natural cataclysms change the whole shape of earth. Mountains may be leveled, new islands may emerge in the middle of oceans. It happens. Very often it happens. Which means the empirical world, the phenomenal world in which we are living is subject to change. And what is subject to change is mithya. That's the meaning. Anything which is subject to change, which changes due to natural cataclysms or any other man-made efforts, is relative, it is not absolute, it is mithya. Now we can understand that ethics can have a very important place in Vedanta. Because as I said earlier, if Vedanta had declared the world as non-existent or illusion, then ethics has no place. But really speaking, Vedanta doesn't say that the world doesn't exist. It only says the world as we see, as we experience, is subject to change, therefore not eternal. That's all. The other dictum the Vedanta says is Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. All living beings are intrinsically divine. There is the divine consciousness in all living beings. These are some of the fundamental principles of Vedanta. Now let us come to ethics. Ethics deals with duties, responsibilities, actions, meaning of life, significance of life, problems, our interaction with fellow human beings, our interaction with ourselves and our interaction with the rest of the world. So ethics is an important subject, not necessarily in philosophy, but in its expanded interpretation. Now, I shall come back to the Vedanta philosophy again. Now, Vedanta says this world is not eternal. It is subject to change, and consciousness or Atman is the only reality. This Atman is all-pervading, immanent in all beings. Now, what place does this idea have in our daily life? If you observe our own life, full of problems and anxieties, worries, uncertainties, and if you really think of the real root cause of many of these problems, we will understand we take everything very seriously. We have a wrong notion that a problem that creates anxiety is a real problem, is a problem that lasts for long. If a person faces a tragedy in life, in domestic life, if he loses money perhaps, if the share markets collapse, if the banks collapse, if the sales go down, we all become anxious. Lot of anxiety, conflict, worry. All these will naturally this will be the natural consequences of problems that we face in life. It may be the separation of a near and dear one. It may be hostile feelings that of a person from whom we expect love and care and affection. And again, it could be economic problems like the collapse of a bank or the share markets. Now, all these problems normally create fears, conflicts, and anxieties. If you go to a psychiatrist, he will give medicine or he may give some counseling. But psychology and psychiatry do not touch the real problem. Because psychology and psychiatry at the most interpret human beings as a psychophysical mechanism. Now, if you try to solve the problems of mind at the mental level, we can never find a solution. Because mind by its very nature is a wavering phenomenon. It changes. Sometimes it becomes anxious, sometimes it becomes unhappy, and then happy, and again unhappiness, and so on. Now, modern psychology and psychiatry are trying to find problems for psychological problems at the psychological level. But Vedanta tells you the real problem can be found only at a higher level, beyond the level of psyche or mind. If you try to connect this mind with something that lies behind it, something which never wavers, which never becomes unhappy because it never becomes happy. Something which becomes unhappy should become unhappy. Because happiness can never be eternal. Absence of happiness gives way to unhappiness. Before happiness, there was unhappiness. After happiness, also unhappiness. So these are fluctuating, changing phenomena. Now, if you try to link this mind, this wavering mind, with something which is the real substratum of mind, which is the real substratum of human personality, then mental problems can be solved. And what is the substratum? What is the underlying principle behind mind? Vedanta calls it the Atman. And this Atman is eternal. This Atman never seeks happiness, therefore it never becomes unhappy. It never enjoys the world, therefore it never becomes anxious. All our human problems are rooted on one cause. We expect the world to be perfect. We expect all human beings around us to be perfect. Vedanta says the world can never be perfect. The world as world, in its manifold names and forms, can never be perfect. Perfection, in monotheistic religion, we say perfection is in God. That's also one way. That Vedanta accepts that view also. If you believe anybody else in this world other than God to be perfect, and you worry, you fight with a man because you are not perfect, then you are wrong. The other person is not wrong. If you expect your neighbor to be perfect like God, and then you quarrel with him for being imperfect, then the real problem is with the person who goes and quarrels with him. Because in this world, there cannot be anything perfect other than God. That's a view of the devotional school of Vedanta. The metaphysical school of Vedanta, the same view, says there cannot be anything in this world that is perfect. So perfection is something that we have to seek beyond the world. So now, we have different schools of ethics and morality. The most commonly interpreted school of ethics, at least in religious tradition, is based on the belief that God creates this world, God creates all of us, God expects us to behave in a particular manner, and if we do not behave the way God wants us to behave, we will be punished, or if we behave properly, we will be rewarded. So this idea of reward and punishment, Vedanta doesn't refute it. Vedanta fully accepts the place of God in religious life. But Vedanta says there is a higher idea of ethical philosophy, a higher morality. It is not based on the belief in the existence of a transcendental moral authority who creates this world and sits above supervising us. But it is based upon the fundamental principle that inherently the whole creation is one. The Atman, as I said earlier, which is behind the psychophysical mechanism, is one reality. So on the one hand, it gives us a much more solid ideal of ethical philosophy. And on the other hand, it helps us to enjoy peace and harmony within. As I said earlier, all the problems, all the anxieties, all the worries that we confront in the material world are rooted on another important cause, that we expect this world to be perfect. So a person suffers agony, anxiety and worry and unhappiness if the share markets go down, or there is an economic crisis, because he expects that the economic condition will remain stable till infinity. Or he believes that these material conditions in this world will remain in a happy condition throughout history. But that is not possible. The moment he understands that change is the essential ingredient, the essential nature of this world in which we are living, then change will not shock us. This is one aspect of Vedantic ethics. It helps us to enjoy peace and harmony within. It may be difficult to understand from a metaphysical point of view, but it is easy to understand if we try to learn to link the wavering mind with the unwavering, the eternal Atman. As we said, very often it depends upon how we interpret our own personality. If we interpret our own personality as a body, then even minor disease can upset our mind. If we interpret our personality as a psychophysical mechanism, then an anxiety or unhappiness can upset our mind. But if we interpret our own personality as something that goes beyond body and mind, if we can link our mind with the unwavering, unchanging Atman or consciousness behind it, and if we interpret our own personality as Atman, as the eternal reality, which never becomes anxious, which never becomes unhappy, which is never shocked, never wavers, never complains. Because it is beyond change, beyond empirical phenomena. Now, this may be difficult. I can just give you an interesting episode from the Upanishads. It's the story from the life of an ordinary householder. Householder means, once we enter the text, we will understand. The story is related to one of the greatest philosophers of Upanishadic age, ancient India. His name was Yajnavalkya. He was an householder. Remember, he was one of the greatest philosophers of that age and one of the greatest wise men of his age. Now, he had 2 wives. That was the practice in those days. Polygamy perhaps was common. Maitreyi and Katyayani. These are the 2 names of his wife. Don't imagine that he was a worldly minded man. Yajnavalkya and his 2 wives, all of them spent their time in meditation, in discussing metaphysics and spiritual philosophy with kings and emperors. That's how they spent their time. Yajnavalkya was all the time debating, discussing philosophy and spirituality with kings and emperors and other saints and sages. So those 2 women also were equally great, as you find from the episode. So he led a long life. He taught many of his disciples. And one of his disciples was one of the greatest kings of ancient India. His name was Janaka, one of his disciples. So he was such an outstanding spiritual hero of that age. So after reaching mature age, maybe 60, 70 years, after having taught innumerable disciples, living in a forest hermitage, teaching boys and girls coming from distant places, and sometimes he had princes among his disciples. He had also poor people, poor Brahmins, poor people belonging to all walks of life. So all of them used to live together in the forest hermitage, and he taught them the Vedas, philosophy, Upanishads, metaphysics, meditation, and so on. So when he reached a mature age, he declared to his wives, well, no, I am going to retire. Retire means what? He said he was going to take sannyasa. It means he was going to be a mendicant. Some like a friar. He was going to renounce the world. The story unfolds a great spiritual ideal gradually. And now, I'm going to share my wealth amongst you. What was his wealth? An old forest hermitage, maybe innumerable palm leaves, in which Vedas and all these were written, ancient scriptures were written. That was all, nothing else. And places for his disciples to sit and meditate, such places, in the midst of a forest. So he said, I am going to retire. I shall read the verse where he says, Maitreyi iti hovaja Yajnavalkya Udyasan va are ahamasmat sthana tasmi hanta te anaya katya inyantam karavani iti. This is a Sanskrit verse. I just want to quote. For those who are interested, this particular verse comes in chapter 2nd, 4th section, first mantra onwards. It comes in the 4th chapter, 5th section also. So, he said, look here, my dear wife, I am going to retire. I want to become a mendicant. In those days in ancient India, there were 2 schools of mendicancy, renunciation. Some great scholars and philosophers will lead the life of householders. They will live in forest hermitages, teach children, and after a long time, they will quit their homes and become wandering monks. There was no institutionalization or organization of monks. They become wandering monks, without home, without anything. They just wander from place to place. As Swami Vivekananda, he wandered all over India from 1886, after the passing away of Sri Ramakrishna, till 1893, maybe April, just before he boarded the ship to Chicago, he was wandering. So this was the practice in ancient times. So he said, I am going to become a wandering monk, a mendicant. I am retiring from active householder's life. Now, you have to remember, his wife was equally great. His wife also equally learned, equally enlightened in spiritual life. Then his wife says, Sahovacha Maitreyi yennu ma iyam bhago sarva prithvi vitena purnasya kadham tena amrudasyamidi. This is it. Neti hovaja Yajnavalkya yathaiva uvarnavadam jividam tathaiva te jividam syar amrudatvasyatu nashasti vitena iti. I am reading fast because this is not a class, but I just want to quote for those who are interested. Now, Maitreyi asked a question. When Yajnavalkya, her husband, declared his intention of taking to a life of complete renunciation, to start the life of a wandering monk, Maitreyi said, now look here, you said that before you renounce the world, before you become a wandering monk, you said you will distribute your wealth amongst us. Now what am I going to gain by this wealth? So you can imagine Maitreyi, his wife, was equally great. So she said, what am I going to gain by this wealth, which you said you are going to give me? Bank balance, vehicles, everything. In those days, maybe nothing else. Am I going to become perfect? Am I going to become spiritually perfect? Am I going to gain perfection in life by all the wealth that they are going to give me? Yajnavalkya was a sincere, honest man. He said, no. You won't be in any way benefited spiritually by accepting all this wealth. You will be just like anybody else who has some money, that's all. You can't attain anything in spiritual life by gaining the wealth which I am going to distribute amongst you. You may just lead a life of a very ordinary person with plenty of money in the bank, that's all. Now, Maitreyi knew already this truth. That's why she asked the question. She uses the word amrutatva. The word means immortality. That's a word she uses. Am I to gain immortality? Am I going to gain something immortal, something permanent, eternal, by accepting this wealth? So she knew that wealth cannot give you immortality, spiritual enlightenment. Now, she says, no, you teach me that, give me that wealth which makes me immortal. That wealth is not wealth, that is spiritual knowledge. If you want to give me anything, you should give me that spiritual knowledge which will give me immortality. Means which will give me the conviction, the experience that I am the immortal Atman. Giving immortality means giving you the knowledge which enables you to experience that you are the immortal, eternal Atman consciousness. That is what she meant. Now, to make such a demand, we should know that she was equally great. A lesser woman would not have asked for such a gift. She was asking for something which should give her the spiritual realization that she was one with the supreme eternal consciousness, Atman. In monotheistic religion, we can say it should make her feel that he is one with God, that she is one with God. That's the gift she's asking for. Then, just before taking up this subject, the spiritual topic, which I already the spiritual giving the spiritual knowledge of Atman consciousness, Yajnavalkya gives a graphic description of transitoriness of everything in this world other than spiritual knowledge. And it's a very psychological exposition you find. He says, now if a person, he gives an example. Suppose a person wants to help his friend to get a good job. What is the purpose behind? Yajnavalkya says, it is not for helping the friend or to give something to the friend that he helps him to get a good job. If he or she helps his friend to get a good job, the feeling of, well, I have helped him to get a good job, makes him happy. It is for this happiness that he helps his friend to get a good job. Another example, suppose a mother loves her children. We normally think that, well, the mother loves her children because of her affection, because of her love. Yajnavalkya says it is not really true. What is the truth? Yajnavalkya says the mother wants to love her children, and by loving her children, by bringing up her children, she enjoys a kind of inner happiness or bliss. For enjoying this inner bliss or happiness, she is loving her child. That is psychological point. In a way, it is true. Suppose a mother suppose by loving her children, If a mother suffers only misery, she won't do that. By loving her children, maybe by helping her children, bringing up her children so that her children become responsible, mature citizens of the country and responsible members of society, by seeing her own children growing up in a very desirable way, when she sees that, she will feel a kind of inner happiness, inner contentment. To enjoy this inner contentment, she is loving her children. So he says, it is for our own Atman, it is for our own consciousness that we are doing everything in this world. Now, Yajnavalkya says, this is a very deep psychological aspect in it. See, we do certain things to help others, not only to help others, in fact, not to help others, but to enjoy the feeling of contentment or happiness that we feel within. Well, I have tried to help somebody. I have done something good. It is this inner contentment or blissful experience that we are seeking. Which means all our actions are directly or indirectly directed towards our own self. Remember, this self is not small letter, yes. Capital letter, yes. Self-consciousness, Atman, the all-pervading reality. We should not misinterpret as a justification of selfishness. Selfishness can have another meaning. Self, if you give capital letter, yes, it means Atman, consciousness, the all-pervading, omnipresent reality, the immanent reality. So that's what Sri Ramakrishna says. We should grow from small self into higher and bigger self. Bigger self is the higher reality, the Atman. So Yajnavalkya says, everything in this world, one way or other, is relative. It's all directed towards our own inner self. Therefore, this Atman is the only reality. If we can keep this idea in mind and then live in this world, we can live happily and without worry. Sri Ramakrishna in modern times in the Gospel says, this knowledge we have to keep somewhere, maybe inside a pocket, somewhere you can tie to you can put it tied for somewhere in a corner of your pocket. If you keep and live in this world, then we can live in this world without problems. We have to live in this world. We cannot run away from the world. Vedanta doesn't say that we should run away from the world. There is a widespread, very common wrong notion that Vedantic ethics is a kind of asceticism. It is absolutely and completely wrong. Vedanta doesn't preach asceticism as its ethical philosophy. This criticism was raised by many thinkers, interpreters and translators who had no access to the original Sanskrit works. According to modern historians, there were just a few Western thinkers who could really study the original scriptures and translate into modern languages. Like one of them was Paul Deussen. Another one was who lived recently in Berkeley University. He was teaching here. He was Fritz Stahl, who went to India and lived for decades, study Vedas, Vedantas and Upanishads. He was originally from Holland, but he taught in Berkeley University. And some of his books were published by collaboration of Berkeley and Harvard universities. So very often, when you read books, you will get the wrong notion that Vedanta is amoral. It has no moral content. Means it has got a neutral approach, a non-committed approach towards ethics. Vedanta actually becomes a most sublime, the highest ethical philosophy, which fundamentally teaches us the world is one. So Vedanta offers a very solid philosophical ideal even to non-believers. Because we cannot hurt anyone in this world without hurting ourselves. The other is not different from ourselves. In other words, there is no otherness in Vedanta. Because it believes in the fundamental principle of unity and oneness of existence. It doesn't recognize geographical or cultural barriers. Because its fundamental principle is based on the fact the reality is one, the existence is one. Another, of course, I already referred to this earlier. Vedanta offers an interesting mechanism that solves some of the problems in our daily life. It goes by the name of Karma Yoga, which we have discussed innumerable times during these sessions. It doesn't preach asceticism. Not only that, it preaches a kind of complete involvement with our duties, day-to-day affairs, responsibilities, total commitment, total application, with all concentration. But at the same time, it tells us that along with this total application and complete commitment, we must keep ourselves a higher goal in mind. This helps us to save ourselves from the anxieties and conflicts that are inevitable in any kind of activity that we may engage in. So, along with total application, if we can keep in mind that whatever I am doing in this world, whatever duties I am performing, the world as it is not an eternal reality. Because we fight and quarrel, we suffer anxieties and unhappiness within, because we expect this world to be permanent. We expect that every effort that we make to produce the expected result exactly. If we don't get 100% result, we become unhappy, we suffer conflicts. If we don't get our expected reaction from our friends and people around, our relatives, then we become unhappy. Because we expect perfection in this world which is really not perfect. So once we understand that world by its very nature can never be perfect. Either God alone is the perfect reality or Brahman consciousness is the only reality that is perfect. With this idea in mind, if we interact with the world, with other people, we can work, live in this world without complaints and worries. That's why Sri Ramakrishna said, this knowledge that the world by its very nature can never be perfect, can never give us whatever we expect from it. No. This knowledge, if we can keep in mind somewhere in a corner, maybe inside the pockets, and then work in this world, we can live in this world without being a slave, without being a victim of worries and anxieties. That's what Sri Ramakrishna compares this world into a river or maybe an ocean. And life itself is a kind of boat journey. Now, we had to use a boat for crossing the river. But the boat should be on the surface of the water. Water should not enter the boat. If the water enters the boat will capsize. And death will be the result. Now, we have to live in this world without the water of worldliness entering the boat of our life. This is possible by keeping these Vedantic ideas in mind and simultaneously engaging in our duties and responsibilities. So there are a few points which I wanted to stress again and again that I started at the beginning itself. One, the word mithya with Vedanta teaches in relation to the world is not illusion as it is very wrongly interpreted by many translators. Mithya doesn't mean illusion. Mithya means something which is subject to change. And anything which is of a changing nature cannot be perfect. The world itself did not exist maybe several millions of years back and may not exist after several more millions of years, which means it is subject to change. So, very often one criticism that is leveled against Vedanta is Vedanta doesn't recognize the importance of ethics. In fact, people compare Advaita Vedanta of Shankaracharya with Kantian philosophy. Kant gave a lot of importance to ethics in his critical-practical reason. And Kant was a great ethical philosopher. One of his contributions was the idea of transcendental ethics. So very many modern thinkers have compared Kantian philosophy with Vedanta, often to the disadvantage of Vedanta, saying that Vedanta ignores the ethical aspects of human life is absolutely, completely wrong. Vedanta, on the other hand, offers the most sublime, the most universal, the most humanistic ideal of ethics. The wrong criticism was often caused by the wrong notion that the word mithya means illusion, not something which just an appearance, which is really no existence. It only means something that is relative, something which is not eternal. I already outlined at the beginning itself. The second the point that I wanted to stress was that the Vedantic ethics is not a kind of asceticism. Vedanta teaches us to live in this world, make use of this world, and make use of our actions for our own spiritual progress. There is a most unforgettable sentence in Swami Vivekananda's complete works. It comes in Practical Vedanta lectures. There he uses a term that's very apt in this context. The sentence is this: the world is a gymnasium for us to work out our karmas. That's Swami Vivekananda. The world is a gymnasium for us to work out our karmas. Now, we don't go to gymnasium to live there. We go to gymnasium for a purpose, to exercise the body. Similarly, we should recognize that this world is not eternal, because, as I said earlier, all the internal conflicts and anxieties and worries and complaints and psychosomatic problems are due to the wrong notion that worldly pleasures are eternal. Whatever we do, we must get the expected result. If the result is not just right, not 100%, everything collapses. We become completely shattered. We lose our balance. But suppose we keep in mind the world by its very nature can never be perfect. And how can you expect perfection from an imperfect world? Therefore, keeping this idea in mind, we should not run away from the world. Vedanta doesn't ask you to run away from the world. Vedanta asks you to make use of the world as a gymnasium that we make use of for doing exercise. Because by living in this world, by doing our duties and responsibilities, with an ideal of mental detachment, we graduate to a higher and higher level of spiritual consciousness, till this great ideal becomes a matter of real experience in our life. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.